It is Monday, March 8th. Who can believe it? We are coming up on our 1-year COVID anniversary. Thanks so much to those of you joining me this morning. Really excited to be here this morning. It's Monday, it's a new week. Hopefully, it's going to be a good week. I know last week for me was kind of crazy. Monday last week was 3 or 4 business days all rolled into one 12-hour day. It was kind of intense. So here's to hoping that this week is not like that. Let me know in the chat box where you're from. It's Monday, and so I know we're going to have a lot of people just remembering about this webinar at the last moment, and that's okay, right? Whoever's here is here, and I appreciate those of you joining me. Hi, Michelle. Yes, you are the first person. It's so interesting. I was watching the waiting room before I hit to go live, and I'm thinking, oh my goodness, nobody wants to come to this session, but it's Monday. Let's be honest, it's getting warmer outside, hopefully there too in Ontario. Here, the sun is shining. And so I think people are starting to get that winter itch, spring itch, right? It's getting harder to do things. So I'm glad that you're here. I know Katie Cleasby is going to be happy that you're here, and I'm sure more people will join us, but the early bird always gets the worm. I will let you know we have an awesome giveaway today, and who knows, maybe you'll be the only person. You'll be the de facto winner. So we wanted to collect some information for the Q&A. And so basically, we're just asking that you comment on this Facebook post a positive or negative intergenerational experience that you've had in the aquatic workplace. You know, just a couple sentences. I know for me, I shared on Instagram last night that I had a pretty significant one for me with a gentleman. He was probably in his mid 40s. I was in my mid or late 20s. But I was the acting manager of recreation for 2 weeks while my boss was away. And he just didn't respect me, didn't like me, didn't want to listen to me. And usually that was manageable in a kind of passive aggressive way. But this was in a big all staff meeting that we had an interaction where I did my best to keep it respectful and professional. But I also then had to meet with him after and unfortunately re-exert some control over the situation, given that if I didn't address the situation, I would not have had any authority for the next 2 weeks as the acting manager of this municipality. So definitely a difficult situation, but I know, Michelle, you'll appreciate the prize today is a sunfish towel. So I have some extra Red Cross towels. These are branded Red Cross towels that are given away as we get these as master instructor trainers, and we can give them away at different resorts. And so this is actually one that I never ended up giving away. So pretty cool to have exclusive CRC snag. So you and Evan, you might have a head off, face off to see who wins the prize, because it's going to be interesting to see who joins us today. Welcome, Evan. It's just you and Michelle so far, so who knows what'll happen. It's Monday, and we're doing a giveaway on the Facebook page, trying to get some different stories from Aquatics, times that you've had maybe an intergenerational experience with an older staff, a younger staff, not just the usual stuff like, you know, late for work, missing class, stressed for exams, boyfriend broke up with them. But, you know, is there something that ever sticks specifically in your mind as a little bit more complex? So I was telling Michelle about the engagement I had with a 40-something facility staff member when I was the acting manager of recreation. This was probably 6 or 7 years ago now, maybe even longer. And then I know the first time that I had an older staff member, so I was in my early 30s, and I want to say she's told me she's in her late 60s, very spry, active. She wouldn't call herself a senior, but very much twice my age. And that was really, really new for me. Somebody who was basically the same age as my mother, who is now 74, and trying to manage their expectations in the aquatic workplace that is, let's be honest, primarily geared towards 16, 17, 18-year-old lifeguards who text, who use an app, who use, online scheduling. What does that look like for somebody who is, oh geez, I'm trying to think what the name of that generation is, but we'll learn about that today. So welcome. I see Christine is here. Welcome, welcome. Evan's here. Hopefully we'll have some more people join us in the next 10 minutes. We had about 108 people registered, but I do notice this year, 2021, attendance has been quite different from 2020, which is fine. Everybody is managing their pool situation quite differently from when we were in lockdown in 2020. And so I do recognize a lot of people are coming off of being very busy in February with the AOAP conference. Ellison Associates had their conference, lots of different conferences that are happening in the US. And it's also really interesting to me because I was speaking with our presenter this morning, Katie Cleasdale, and talking about the conference circuit in the US versus Canada. And February in the US in aquatics seems to be quite busy, whereas in Canada, it is a dead zone. February and March, almost nothing happens. And so that was one of the reasons that in looking to redo the POOLaide webinars in 2021, I thought March was a great time because we're not coming up on April, which is that preseason startup before Victoria Day or Memorial Day in May, but it's also not competing with fall, which in Canada, we have a significant number of conferences in October and November. And so was just trying to space things out. And unfortunately, you can't meet everyone on their schedule, but I am excited that we will have all of these webinars recorded and on YouTube again this year so that they can be accessed at your convenience on your schedule, as well as for something like this, maybe broadcasting it to staff at an in-service or assigning it as homework or, coming back to it as necessary. Yes, thanks, Christine, reminding us today is International Women's Day. And I typically actually don't talk about those types of events or theme days, but I did post something on Instagram a few minutes ago, I guess maybe 20 minutes ago before I hopped on here, that really reminded me because of two conversations I'd had separately this morning with different individuals about challenges that they're experiencing. And I thought, you know what, this actually really applies to this photo that I love that came up on my personal Facebook, the throwback memories from one of those pages, A Mighty Girl, which is a wonderful resource on Facebook or Instagram. If you don't follow A Mighty Girl, they do really excellent things. Hello, we see you, Katie. I don't know if you want to be seen already, but we can see you.
Oh.
So we'll let you hop off if you still want a few minutes. We've got time. I'll let you know when we're starting a few minutes after the hour. So thanks to those of you who are joining us. I'll do a little bit of a recap of last week while we're waiting. Our presenter will be starting a few minutes after the hour. You got a sneak peek. Her name is Katie Cleasby. Some of you will remember her from last year. Last year in April, she covered a session on writing techniques, and she did an amazing job. She did the entire session by herself with about 2 hours notice. I basically had to message her. We were going to the hospital. My husband had another stroke last year, and it was, do you want me to cancel the webinar or can you run it on your own? So I'm eternally grateful to Katie Cleasby for doing that and wanted to bring her back this year to have the full presenter experience with a host and facilitated a Q&A. Because, I mean, she did such an amazing job last year with being thrown into the virtual webinar mix. This was in April, right? This was only 2 months into COVID. Now we are all experts at this virtual business. But yeah, really excited to see what she has prepared for today. Let me go ahead and put in the chat box the link for today's session. So if you're interested in downloading PowerPoint slides, we will also be updating that in a couple days, couple weeks with the recording, as well as any resources that she shares during the session or that you share in the chat box. As always, These webinars are collaborative, so if there is a resource or video or article or blog or podcast that you have found beneficial, sharing with your staff or developing yourself and your ability to work with different generations, we always appreciate you sharing that in the chat box, and we can throw that on the show notes so they can still be an ongoing resource for other aquatic professionals in perpetuity, not just today during the live event. So thanks to those of you who are joining us. I'm going to pin the link for today's session in the chat box. So I will be introducing our presenter in just a few minutes. I want to circle back to the recap that I said I was doing, and then I never did, regarding the webinars we had last week. So if you're new to POOLaide in 2021, last week, March 1 to 5, was our first week. And so on Monday, March 1st, we had a great session about making swimming pools more accessible to trans youth, how we can implement policies, procedures, very manageable small steps to try and be more welcoming as a facility. That webinar will be uploaded once the recording is available. I do have somebody who's going to be doing some trims and making the video a little bit more presentable. I will get that up on YouTube as soon as I can. You can subscribe to our channel if you want to be notified, receive an alert as soon as it is available. Our aim is kind of within 1 to 2 weeks, but I can't guarantee this individual is still a student. And so aiming for a little bit more work-life balance this year to getting that up and available. On Wednesday, March 3rd, we had a great session with Kathleen Forrestel, who is a partially sighted or blind advocate in Ottawa, Ontario. She was also talking about her lived experience as somebody who is getting progressively more blind and how she navigates living in a city, going to swimming pools, being active, and some of the limitations or experiences she's had in public aquatic facilities, public recreation facilities, and how we as aquatic professionals can work better with individuals with different needs, and being aware of how accessible or navigable our facilities are. Thanks to those of you guys introducing yourselves in the chat box. Please do so as I keep talking. It's really nice for our presenter, Katie Cleasby. I'll be introducing her in 1 or 2 minutes. It's nice for her to see where you guys are from. I recognize a lot of names, but she doesn't necessarily know everyone. Recapping the final session we had last week on Friday, March 5th, we had a session with Ryan Jones about water slides. And I know there wasn't a lot of attendance at that session, which is perfectly fine. Everybody picks and chooses the sessions that are most applicable to them. But he and I had a really great conversation at the end of the session regarding water slide maintenance, as well as looking at how, what are the amenities in your pool and who are they attracting? So not just, adult lap swimmers, is it preschoolers, parents, what does that look like? And how can we make sure that our facility is balanced in terms of equally reaching different populations and communities to generate revenue? So that's one I'm really excited for when the webinar recording is posted on YouTube. Do give us another 1 or 2 weeks to get that up, but you can keep an eye on the show notes as well as our website, lakeviewaquaticconsultants.com, for all of the sessions. Also last week, I did an Instagram live with Coach Dave Ling of the Newmarket Stingrays Swim Club. We talked about the Olympics. We talked about competitive swimming during a COVID atmosphere. All of those things that we as aquatic professionals, we often get tired of thinking about competitive swimmers. We haven't always had the best experiences with competitive swimmers at our facilities, but really taking an empathic perspective right now about the challenges that they have individually experienced as people and athletes during the last year of uncertainty, and what that means for their dreams they might have held since they were very, very little. So if you want to have a look at that recording, it is on our Instagram account. If you don't follow us on Instagram, it's going to be, I'm going to pop that in the chat box, and that recording is on IGTV. So if you scroll to the right, you can find the longer videos that are 40, 50, 60 minutes. And I like to play them in the background when I'm walking or cooking or cleaning. So thank you everyone for joining us. I think I'm going to jump into our introduction for today because I know we have a really great session planned and I want to respect your time and how much time you might have to be with us this morning. So today is Monday, March 8th. It is 2021. I'm your host, Katie Crysdale, and I'm very happy today to introduce another Katie. This is going to be Katie Cleasby delivering a session entitled Working with Different Generations in Aquatics. So she's going to be talking about the different generations that we encounter in the workforce, as well as specific tips and strategies that apply to aquatics as a unique workplace. Katie Cleasby is the aquatics coordinator at the Claude Moore Recreation and Community Center in Loudoun County, Virginia. She has a background in aquatics, including lifeguarding and pool operation, teaching physical education, athletic administration, and is currently working on her doctorate degree as part of the executive leadership program at George Washington University. She has a passion for leadership, travel, and lives a plant-based lifestyle and enjoys training for triathlons and marathons. So I want to give a big welcome to Katie Cleasby. We're going to give her a moment to get up on camera. I'm going to pull up her screen, our PowerPoint. A reminder, I have pinned in the chat box the link for today's session, so you can read more about Katie Cleasby. You can have a look at the PowerPoint slides if you are somebody who likes to take notes that way. And we'll be following the same format that we always do. If you're new to these webinars, the presenter will be presenting. While they are presenting, I will be off screen in the chat box, taking your questions, addressing, keeping track of questions for our presenter. And then at the end, we'll do a Q&A, answering your questions, as well as discussing things that have come up. Do you want to say something, Katie? Perfect, yeah.
Can everybody hear me?
Yeah, let her know in the chat box, and I'm going to disappear. And big welcome and thank you to Katie Cleasby.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Katie, for allowing the opportunity to speak today. And I'm excited to talk to you about working with different generations in aquatics. So as Katie mentioned, I work at Claude Moore Recreation Center in Loudoun County, Virginia. And I noticed we had some folks here today from all across the country and internationally, but somebody was from Portland, Maine. So I moved down here in 2018 from Virginia, from New Hampshire and Massachusetts area, and spent many summers in Portland, Maine. So I recognize some of those places. And I am working on my doctorate in aquatics, looking at decision-making in aquatics for lifeguards. So that's kind of down the road, but my background is in physical education and aquatics for the last 10 years and about each. All right. So today we're going to do a quick little icebreaker, and then we'll get into defining what is a generation, the definition of that, the 5 generations that are working currently in the workplace right now. And then we're going to look at each of the generations and connect them to aquatics. And then what's next, the emerging generation. And finally, we'll look at gen flexing and how we can coordinate and help and support communication skills and different things that have worked for us so far in emphasizing the strengths and weaknesses of each of those generations in aquatics. All right, so here's my icebreaker, and we were going to use Mentimeter, but I think for this presentation, we're just going to use the chat. Mentimeter is a great interactive tool for presentations. So in the chat, if you want to go ahead and write, what song or show do you remember from when you were growing up? So a song or a show. So I am a millennial, so I remember Full House and Britney Spears and Sync. And all those songs from the 2000s, but I know we have obviously 5 different generations in the workforce and in aquatics. Facts of Life, I see 21 Jump Street. Yep, that was a movie. So it looks like we do have some millennials here today. I remember Boy Meets World as well. Do we have some older? 90210, there we go. Flintstones. So we're going back now to Gen X and baby boomers. Gummy Bears, Spin City. Yes. So that's about Gen X. Excellent. So this is a great example here that we've got all different generations and folks remembering times and places and important incidents that happened when they were growing up. Thank you. All right, so what is a generation? It is a population in society where people are born in from the same general time span, but also share key life experiences and beliefs and attitudes. So, and if you look at Dr. Morris Massey, he talks about you are who you are because of where you were when. And in this presentation and a lot of the research that I did leading up to this presentation today, I found many of the dates are all over the place. However, what's consistent is the actions and the life events that folks experienced during their generations really shaped who they were today. And understanding these generational experiences and how they've been studied in the workplace. These studies show that with an understanding of these things, it's going to help improve the way that organizations recruit, how we train, how we promote, reward, hire, and how we really communicate with these employees. So Dr. Massey his work was focused on values and generations and those significant emotional events. So this important fact for you to know as you move through this presentation today, it's really not a specific time that changes for each generation. It's what happened. So, for example, COVID-19, Gen Z will be the generation that COVID-19 was one of the main events that happened and shaped the way that they were developed and brought up. All right, so we look at the 5 different generations currently in the workplace. And you've got your traditionalists. Those folks are born between 1925 and 1945. And then you've got your baby boomers, 1946 to about 1964. Then Gen X comes right before millennials, 1965 to 1980. And then your millennials are born. I'm an elder millennial. I've heard that term before. I was born 1987. Millennials born 1981 to 2000. And then your Gen Z, right? Those are your lifeguards right now. Those are the folks born 2001 to 2020. And the dates will fluctuate as you see throughout the presentation. So these generational memberships have become really a stereotype of a particular population and these individuals. So when we use these stereotypes to group different memberships, researchers has studied these generational differences in terms of work values, and the use of the influence tactic are different learning styles, anxiety, depression among children, and narcissism. So looking at different events and how they're studied. Okay, so this slide just kind of sums it all up here. So the traditional generation, you're really looking at the silent generation. They kind of come in. They do what they're told. They follow work top down. They're silent generation. The baby boomer generation, it's called the pig in the python. For example, when you think of like a python is a large snake, right? And if a snake swallows, a rabbit or a python or whatever it is, the pig, there's a giant influx in data, right? The python is flat and then it swallows something. And then continues on. So it's not necessarily saying the baby boomers are pigs, but there's a shift in the data. And Generation X, so those are, thinking about your managers. I know my supervisor is Gen X. And then you look at the millennials. I'm also supervisor. And then your Gen Z, so those are your lifeguards. And that's really what inspired me to do this presentation, because I felt like I was banging my head against the wall trying to understand these Gen Zs and where their heads are at. And so this presentation emerged. So if we start to look at the traditional generation, those are your folks who, there's very few left of them in the workplace. They might be retired, but they might be coming back as like your part-time swim instructors, or if they still are hanging around, they're at the very top of their career. But most are retired. And they are known as the greatest generation because, they were born and lived through the Great Depression, World War II. They're really less tech savvy. They have a strong work ethic and they prefer that face-to-face interaction. They're very conservative. They're disciplined, that top-down chain of command and formal. They really believe that paying their dues and their word is their bond. They prefer formality, and they love social order. And they love their things and tend to hoard things too. So, and if you think about traditionalists in aquatics, right? I chose this picture of the woman looking out at the open water because I remember my own grandmother growing up in New Hampshire, in Massachusetts, in Cape Ann. She would just go out, put her bathing cap on, and swim back and forth in the ocean. Didn't worry about how cold it was, and just enjoy that open water. And that was because, the traditionalists in that generation, they really didn't have access to pools and formal swim lessons, that they had that open body of water. And they had some lessons right there on Front Beach in Rockport, Massachusetts. And so she grew up swimming in the ocean. But yeah, they might, if they are still in the workplace, they're high up. They can see the big picture because they've seen the changes for the last many years. And there might be a specific process for new initiatives that you might need to think about when you're coming up with a proposal, or you're about to present your budget, and there is a traditional in that position, right, of authority. Things that might go through your head as you're proposing something, where a Gen Z or a millennial might want to just talk about it and, hey, I've got this great idea. They want to see a process, a formal way of doing things. They're very conservative with the budget, right? So it's just things to keep in mind, and respect for the rules. They're dedicated, they're frugal, they're loyal, right? So those older groups. And then I also, in the top left corner too, I included a picture of the original lifeguard buoys, I should say, that kind of came out before 1945 in the 1930s. Those were like the first originals. So it's kind of fun getting some historical knowledge of aquatics in here as well. So and then we moved to the baby boomer generation, right? So that's 1946 to 1964. So these folks are in their 50s and 60s right now, and they've lived through the Vietnam War, the civil rights riots, they've lived through the Kennedy and the Martin Luther King assassinations, Watergate, the sexual revolution, Woodstock, the 60s. They're characterized as individuals who believe that hard work and sacrifice are really the price to pay for success. So they're the ones who started that workaholic trend. They're process versus product, right? Millennials and Gen Z, they want product. They're not really focused on the process. They want instant results. They're confident for baby boomers. They're task completers. They value health and wellness. And the baby boomer, term comes from that extra 17 million babies that were born during that time. They're also raised to respect authority, and they've really witnessed not to trust anybody over 30, according to some of the data here. They really grew up in kind of a changing world in the last generation. So if we look at baby boomers and aquatics now, so those are your managers. And really, when they were first in aquatics, it was just Red Cross, at least in the United States anyways. They've seen how lifeguarding has evolved with not having a rescue tube to having a rescue tube and what that looks like. They prefer in-person meetings. I know, in my experience, baby boomers generally want to meet face-to-face when there's difficult conversations. I'm a millennial, so I'm happy to do it on text or, let's chat via video web. But more weight is given to their opinion. They might still have manuals and workbooks. So I have a picture here of the first AED. So the first AED was invented in 1978. This is when backyard pools were just starting to become popular for baby boomers. In 1958, the American Medical Association endorsed the mouth-to-mouth breathing, right? So, and then in 1960, Dr. Peter Safar approached the Norwegian toy maker to develop the realistic life-size mannequin to teach mouth to mouth. So this was all, in that generation for resuscitation. So the mannequin's face, and we've seen this before, was inspired by a girl who drowned in the Seine River. And that's the Anne, right? The face of Resuscita Anne. And in 1964, that is when the first rescue tube was made from foam rubber dipped in a rubber coating. And that was originally just started in 1935, was the original rescue tube. But that 1964 was the red iconic tube. So this is all happening right in the baby boomer generation. Then you get to Gen X. So these folks are born between 1968 and 1979. And these folks are in their 40s and 50s. And they're known as the baby bust generation, right? There's this significant difference in the amount of babies that were born between the baby boomer and the baby and Gen X, because folks are now, women are working in the workforce, and they grew up in a period of really financial instability. They witnessed their parents maybe getting laid off, really decline in that global power. There was a stagnant job market. So now folks are really thinking, like, can they afford, families of 4 to 10? That was happening in the baby boomer generation. They're downsizing, limited wage and mobility. They value continuous skill and learning development. And they're really ruled by a sense of accomplishment and not on the clock by like punching in a certain amount of hours. Money is really not a motivation for Gen Xers, and they really like feedback. So they've grown up in homes where both parents worked in comparison to the traditionalists or the baby boomers, or in event that a single parent household because of the high divorce rates that were happening. So we're starting to be influenced by MTV, AIDS, worldwide competition. They're just starting to get that instant feedback, right, from video games. Apple just started to come out with its first Macintosh computer at the very brink of the instant technology. And as an elder millennial for myself, I always feel like I have more Gen X attributes than I do millennial, just because I was on the back end of all this. I remember MTV and the first Macintosh computer, and I had a cord phone and listening to the dial-up internet. All right, here's a little interactive activity here. What is a Gen X most likely to listen to? So you can just pop that in the chat there. Is it the Beatles, Nirvana, or Lizzo? We have Nirvana. Yes, you've got it, folks. It is Nirvana. Yep. I asked my husband this last night, and he's like, who's Lizzo? And I said, well, that's why you're not a Gen Z. The answer is Nirvana. Okay, so we're moving on. So we're making that connection to Gen X and Aquatics now. So this is when, Baywatch came out, and Baywatch aired September 22nd, 1989. And this was really a trial by fire approach. If you ask like a traditionalist or a baby boomer, and like, I learned to swim, my dad threw me off the boat in the lake, and that's how I learned to swim, kind of thing. We're moving away from that. So now there's backyard swimming pools. There's more access to swim lessons in Gen X. There's a rise in water parks, right? So families need to learn to swim to enjoy aquatics. And River Country in Disney World, that was their first major water park that was announced in 1976. So all these manuals started coming out with CPR, Red Cross. And folks in Gen X still prefer to work on their desktop. They might be answering their emails right at work at their desktop. They'll come to meetings with pen and paper versus like their phone on the notes section or a laptop. And also in 1982, the printing of the Red Cross Life-Saving Rescue and Water Safety says that, and this is, quote, If a person is in danger of drowning only a short distance from shore and there is no rescue equipment available of any kind, an untrained swimmer may feel that it is necessary to attempt the rescue. In such cases, the rescue should swim to a position behind the victim and make contact with the victim by seizing the person's hair. So that statement came out in 1982, right? For lifeguard certification cards just became a thing for the advanced life-saving and water safety. Yes, all those texts from ARC. Thank you, Colleen. And also the first lifeguard cards had like a silhouette of a drowning man, which is interesting. So I thought that was a fun little fact here. All right, another interactive activity. What is the largest generation in the workforce today? You can just put that right in the chat. First, we've got Amy says millennials. Michelle says millennials. Paige says millennials. Depends on the work type. Yes, you got it, folks. It is millennials. And that was my segue into the next generation here. So you've got your Gen Y or your millennials and the me generation, right? Sometimes they have a bad rap. They're born between 1980 and 1999, so they're in their 30s and 40s. They've really been shaped by parent access, computers, dramatic technology advances. They're super comfortable with technology. They really value teamwork, collective action. We embrace diversity. We're really adaptable to change, and they're confident, right? So they've been characterized also as being demanding and the most confident generation. And just another fun aquatics fact, in 1999, the Red Cross included the AED training in their CPR courses. So it wasn't until like just the brink of the millennium that, you know, the Red Cross decided to have AEDs as part of that. I have 2 slides for millennials because they are the largest group in the workforce today. So I thought it was important to kind of have more information on that because you'll be working with mostly millennials and important to understand like where they're coming from. Obviously, we're the smartphone generation. We've started to get used to remote working, especially, you know, within the last year here. Currently, we want flexible hours, looking for leadership development and opportunities to give back. They're the social buffs, according to this graphic here, they're tech geeks. We're really connected to their peers. 16 is the average number of coworkers that millennials connect to on Facebook. At least from my own experience, I'm not connected to my baby boomer or traditionalist, but some of the Gen X's, but mostly, you know, that's where we're charged is on social media. And some would say that we are emotionally charged. We lead with our emotions. So Gen Y, does anybody know why they might be called the Peter Pan generation? And you can just put that in the chat as I'm talking. It's kind of, I had to look that up too. I'm like, why is it called the Peter Pan? Just a little hint, Never Land is where you never grow up. Yep. So they never grow up. So some of the millennials, you know, are still living with their parents and, you know, especially with the change in the insurance age where they can live with their friends, but they also have super high debt from college and financial debt. So it makes it very hard for them to live on their own independently. But yeah, this generation for the millennials is thinking about maybe they aren't going to have kids. Maybe they're choosing different religions or maybe no religion at all. Their money really isn't everything, and work-life balance really matters. All right, so if you get into our millennials and aquatics, so we have choices now. So millennials, you know, are raised and living in a time where you have a choice of Ellis, Red Cross, maybe your Star Guard. There are plazas now with swim schools everywhere. Competitive swim teams. I mean, just at my pool alone, we've got 22 different swim teams that rent from us. The choices are unreal for different swim teams that and kids are raised to swim right away and all the way up through college. You have triathlons that are available now. Every condo and apartment association has a pool accessible to them. Technology, there's drowning detection systems. You've got fancy goggles that have like the time in them, and you can even watch YouTube on goggles now. And there's smart watches that you don't have to count your laps anymore. It'll do it for you. And tech suits, and that's not a typo, Finis, that you can actually bone conductor. They listen there, not even through your ears, right? Bone conduction, what earphones. And so these are your folks that are just totally emerged in like technology, and these are your emerging leaders as well. So they really just have access to all this technology and diversity and ways to really explore aquatics in a totally different in multiple venues. And then we bring our presentation to Gen Zs. So these are your kids that are lifeguards right now. These are your swim instructors who might be younger. They're born from 1995 to 2020. Right now, they're in their teens and their 20s. They value social responsibility, and they respond to mentoring and coaching. They're pragmatic, which just means they're practical. You know, well, that doesn't make sense. Why would I do that kind of thing? They're connected. They're global. They're really into giving back in communities. And so if we look at that in aquatics, right, like I love that picture I included at the bottom there, is all our, you know, the kids are just so immersed in their cell phones today. They are looking for choice and input. They just want to be heard. So we actually had a really interesting head guard meeting a couple weeks ago, and they were looking for some feedback, and we heard a lot of feedback about some changes we wanted to make, and they didn't feel comfortable telling it to myself or my supervisor, so they had a special meeting with the facility manager. And it's funny because everything they said is what the research that I just did matched exactly. They literally said, we just want to be heard. We want to be treated like adults. We don't want to be talked down to. And when I did research for this presentation, I thought, oh my gosh, like this is spot on. This makes sense now. So it's really been effective in changing the way that we start to interact with our lifeguards, and realizing that they just need a lot more coaching and mentoring, and they want responsibility and independence and flexibility, but also giving them guidelines and space to do that in choices. So I liked, oh, I'm sorry. There was one other tidbit I wanted to include too for the millennials. In 2017, Disney included on their cruise ships lifeguards. So that was important too. So, okay. So if you really look at this graphic, I like this graphic because we're making the switch now from millennials to Gen Z. And, you know, our Gen Zs are really entrepreneurial. And a fact I found was Gen Z is more likely to judge someone for what you are rather than who you are. They eat, sleep, and breathe technology, and they just want to be heard. So our millennials are really into text messages. You know, they're optimists. And then Gen Z is all about pictures. Instagram, right? Their gram, Insta, whatever you want to call it. Facebook is for millennials. Gen Z is for Instagram, anything with pictures, TikTok, and beyond. So, and there's other platforms out there as well. Snapchat, yes, anything that's like instant. They don't even want to read paragraphs. We use GroupMe, and we get all the time, why do you write so much in GroupMe? They don't want to read emails. They don't want to read paragraphs. They just want memes, pictures, easy, you know, back to back. Millennials want to be discovered. Gen Z work hard for success. So I thought this was a great graphic that kind of compared the shift in some of the values that are occurring. So if you look at the workforce percentages, so now we're moving from 2020, right? to 2025, and soon Gen Z will be taking over the workforce. So in Gen Z, maybe many of them know how to operate a tablet or a cell phone before they could even put a sentence together, right? As soon as, they've got that iPad in front of them as soon as they're born. They don't remember life without social media, and they'll spend up to 9 hours a day just consuming media. I had a staff member in Indra says reopening 2025 guard said that send multiple short emails instead of one summary because it was too long for them to read it and they would just delete it. Yes. I would definitely, I can see that. I don't feel my staff isn't engaging in GroupMe. I think it takes some time for GroupMe. I mean, I can also look into maybe GroupMe is beyond Gen Z now. Maybe that's not working. They have a short attention span, and to keep them engaged, right? Something to remember. So in the next 10 years, it's estimated that the Gen Z will consist 22% of the workforce, and they'll be working jobs that don't even exist yet, which is really something I think COVID has really brought us into that area as well, thinking of how we can redefine our jobs in our workforce. So then this graphic kind of sums up where we're going into the next place here. So we've talked about each of the different generations. Our baby boomers, they care about health, wellness, and quality. Our Gen X's, they're anti-busy and cynical, according to this this particular infographic here. They've grown up. Gen Y's, millennials, with technology, and Gen Z, they are born digital. And you can see these age groups here on all these different graphics and my different research that I've come upon. The age groups are different, but what's the same is the events that they've experienced are similar. So who's next? Gen Alpha. Right? Those are the kids being born right now into 2025. And we really don't know about Gen Alpha yet. We're still learning. According to this graphic, they are decision makers, but we're still learning because they haven't quite gotten into the workforce yet. Okay, so if you think about our customer service for the traditionalists, it's important to really not rush things, right? You've got your older groups for customer service, like your lap swimmers, your water walkers, the ladies who kind of do water aerobics. Those folks who are coming to your facility in the middle of the day, and you learn their names on a first name basis, and you're very respectful. You establish a rapport. There's an older gentleman I can remember. Every single day he calls me boss. Hey boss. And we've established a rapport. Watch your language, be formal, but these are things that are timeless, right, in customer service, but really important to emphasize for this generation. Not being too chummy or overly personal for the older generation. And then if you think about serving baby boomers for customer service, so 87% of them are going to research things before they make a purchase, right? They're making sure they follow that process. Be personable, especially in your greetings. Take time to check in, find out how they're doing, treat them like friends. If they're regular customers, give them something extra special, customer of the week, extended warranty type thing. And then we were looking at tips for serving Gen X. So you want to be efficient. So now Gen X, millennials, Gen Z, we're starting to get into technology where things are a little bit more efficient. Xers won't purchase a product until they've researched it thoroughly. Make yourself available to share information, but Xers might be a little cynical and a little distrusting because of everything that they experience so much uncertainty in their generation, those events that occurred. Don't hover, kind of just give them information they need to have, and then let them make their own decisions. And important to understand that don't be put off by an Xer's aloofness. Most won't be warm and friendly to you. Now, obviously, these are generalizations. Not everyone falls into these generational guidelines, I guess, but important things to keep in the back of your head. And then searching tips for serving millennials, right? Be respectful. These are the things I heard straight from our millennials and our Gen Zers. Don't talk down or condescend them because they're young. They want to be treated maturely, be sensitive to those generational clashes, right? We have heard millennials use in a derogatory word way, so you don't have to do a song and dance, but pick up the pace, and we want to make it look flashy and keep their attention, I guess. Value that personalization over speed, and skip the AI experience, to get them to be a human and looking up and making that eye contact. And then lastly, our Gen Zs, right? Their time is short. They don't have as much attention span because everything is fast, flashy pictures, videos. They even talk faster than any other group. The 18 to 24-year-olds, 60% more likely an average consumer to hang up if a business doesn't answer the phone right away. Like, they don't have any patience for it. Gen Z will leave a brand entirely after 3 bad customer service experiences. But on the other hand, if it's good, they'll blow you up on social media, right? It's guaranteed to sing your praises on Instagram or Twitter. So, it's important for that customer service because they have brand ambassadors and all those new positions that are created for Gen Zs, and they do well with those types of things. And then if you think about communication, so I like this graphic because the boomers, they'll talk to you in person, right? Hi, Floyd, like, how are you doing, kind of thing, that interaction, taking the time to get to know someone. They really appreciate that. We have some older customers at the pool who they want to meet with you face to face to talk about a process or a rule that's occurring, and they want to give you their feedback. And they really appreciate your time that you spent talking to them. The Gen Xers, you might receive an email from them that, something happened at the pool today and it just concerned them. And they operate, Gen Xers, those that I know anyway, are high on the email as well. Just send them an email. Then you have your millennials texting, at least for me as much. I don't mind texting my supervisor, or just a quick, like, let me just take care of this, reminder. And then the Gen Zs are all in the cell phones all the time with their pictures and videos and all the social media that they use. So it's just important to kind of keep these in the back of your head. And if we look at 2 different views for generational differences, as we talked about before, the first one is that shared events influence and define each generation. So meaning that these values, the reactions, and the behaviors are different across generations. And then the other view was that although there are variations to the employee's life cycle, generations may be generic in what they want from their jobs. So not everybody fits into your influences that happen in those generations. And then it's important to kind of touch upon your unconscious bias and stereotypes for this presentation as well. So generally speaking, a bias is that assumption or a belief or prejudice about a category of people. And we talked a lot about the stereotypes that occur in each of the generations today. And it's important to kind of understand that we might have an unconscious bias and have that mental blind spot. Then when we're talking to a Gen Z or someone who's young, we see the research, and you're more informed today with what the research says. But of course, it might conflict with what that person really truly is. Maybe they're an old soul, and to think about, their generational events don't always define them. For example, younger workers, the bias that younger workers don't work as hard as the older workers do. Their way of working is very different than it used to be. Maybe it's smarter, not harder. Maybe they don't have to punch a clock. Maybe they're getting what they need to get done in a different way in a faster way, more efficient way, whatever that looks like. So it's important to really kind of stop and think about those in what maybe what biases are conscious or unconscious that you might have regarding generations other than your own, because we all do that, and it's important to kind of stop and acknowledge it. It's not something you have to share in the chat right now, but I know, when we went to the Diversity and Aquatics conference for at the end of AOAP, there were some great sessions there on unconscious bias and things that happen in your everyday world. And then you stop and think, why did I just do that? Or why did I have that thought? Ooh, I need to change that. That's interesting. And talk about it with someone you trust or know. Identify it and move forward and move on and see if you can change that moving forward. And that's just having your own self-awareness as a leader. Okay, and then lastly, learning how to gen flex, right? So meaning as a manager or a leader or an employee, you're going to have to work with different generations. And that's what makes working in the workplace with all these different age groups so unique and special and positive, because every generation can bring something good and if we work together. So if you understanding the characteristics of each generation, knowing what motivates the generation, obviously Gen Z is motivated by technology. The traditionals, baby boomers, are motivated by hard work and meeting in person and being aware of the most important action steps that you need to take for each generation. Who is your audience? Who are you working with? If you're making a presentation, if you're about to have a meeting, if you're going to design a program, who are you targeting? And what is the best venue and verbal and way to approach that? Okay, and then how can managers and the generation in their workforce work together, right? So consider, hosting team building activities, understanding what can bring employees together in your different departments. Recognize that there's really no one fits all approach to managing multiple generations, and use your senior staff as mentors and coaches. And the next slide will really talk about that. And finally, really bring a culture in your organizations that emphasizes teamwork, where older workers are respected, but also younger workers are also valued, because each generation and older, younger, everyone has something that attributes they can bring to the table. So mixing it up. I saw this actually, I'm not sure who, but I totally stole it from AOAP. Somebody, maybe Joey, I think it was Joey, had a big and little. So that concept from fraternities and sororities, where you have a big and little. And I wanted to start doing this in my own aquatics department, where the younger lifeguards are assigned their big, and they have an older lifeguard or an older swim instructor or someone who is their big, where it creates that other level of support for you as well. So they're not just going to you every single time for help or questions on how to submit their timesheet. They'll go to did you ask your big? Or if they're feeling frustrated, there's somebody to help them has a little bit more experience and time there in the workplace, or your little, and a time to your older folks to help learn to mentor and learn those skills necessary as well. So having your older lifeguards and your older instructors teach your younger staff. So we have an older swim instructor, Neil. He's retired, and I asked him to put on a workshop for our younger swim instructors about equipment. And Neil did a great job, and because he's been a swim instructor for probably 20 years now. And he's a great asset to our team. And also invite your managers and your division managers to your in-services. So I'm trying that, actually starting that this week. I invited one of our division managers of Parks and Recreation to come talk to our head lifeguard. So I know maybe he's a baby boomer or a Gen X. I'm not sure. It doesn't matter. But they're going to come talk to our essentially Gen Zs about leadership for our monthly leadership meetings. And I'm started to line up folks too from different departments. I was thinking about inviting the fire and rescue chief as well as a presenter for our in-service trainings and matching up to their experience for our younger lifeguards. And then I included this picture too from the movie The Intern. This movie, if anyone's seen it before, you know that the gentleman, he's after his wife passes away of 40 years, he's 70, he's retired. He finds himself with too much time on his hands, and he becomes a senior intern. And he interviews and he gets this internship and really discovers that, you know, him and the CEO have a lot to learn from each other. And so Ben learns a lot about technology, but also some of those traditional values and traditional processes he teaches to the CEO, who's definitely of a younger generation. And everybody benefits from that mutual respect. So it's a great movie. And also, finally, I know there's been presentations in the past about really utilizing your retired folks as part-time swim instructors or lifeguards, and they can also, your younger generation can benefit from that coordinating relationship from learning in different values and different generations. And then if we move into lessons that can be learned from the older generation, things like wisdom, self-awareness, that level-headedness, institutional knowledge, and politics. These are all lessons that can be learned over time and experience, right? Some of these things like politics and just general institutional knowledge, you can't learn your first or second year. You know, you learn by experience and in just working with different people over time, and your personal cloud or whatever it is, their value you bring over time to an organization, the more awareness you learn about yourself, and that just general level-headedness that you don't have to go from 0 to 100 for certain things, and where to put your time and effort on, right? So those are all lessons that you can learn from an older generation. And it's interesting because an hour before I did this presentation, I got off the phone with one of my direct reports, my aquatic supervisor, and I found myself coaching her on an HR issue on documentation and you know, steps to take, and I thought, like this is so applicable to this presentation. But obviously, we're all still learning from each other. And then if you look at lessons to be learned from the younger generation, the technology, right? They're so fluid with technology. I'll even go to our younger generation. Like, I was starting to try about TikTok. I'm like, tell me about TikTok. Show me, like, how does this work? And they love that, right? Like, they have so many good ideas. They think outside the box. They think about things in ways that we couldn't even wrap our heads around. They're great with work-life balance as well. They're really good about, like, some of our lifeguards, you know, like, this is my family time, you know, identifying that balance. And they're good at going for their dreams as well. They have that confidence. And you could say they want to go right to the top, but good for them for thinking and trying that. And they're entrepreneurs, right? They want to come up with their own business, whatever that is. And there's so many out there that just have their own YouTube channels or whatever it is at age 16, and they're doing it. And some of them are, as far as their own social media gurus, they're my role models for that. And, you know, I'm like, I need to do more of that, so we can learn from the younger generation as well. And then, so lastly, these are just some open-ended questions. And if you want to go ahead and put some of these in the chat, if you feel comfortable. What I find most irritating or challenging about this generation is, so I guess we're talking about our Gen Zs right now. And there's a positive one after this. So we'll talk about we'll end with the positives, but we'll start. What do you find most irritating or challenging about this generation? Yes, Megan says the lack of attention span. I would agree. I feel like I have to work twice as hard to keep them in, or 2 hour in service and all kinds of games and activities and we're going to use stations and different ways of communicating. Yes, parents for sure. Emails and texts, lots and lots of texts. Yep. Accountability. Some of this is like just general teenagers, no matter what. Yeah, they're overscheduled, right? The parents, we always have to have many conversations where I can't speak to the parent, that you have to speak to the employee, but the parent wants to be involved. All right, so now let's move to the positives. What I appreciate or admire most about this generation. Sometimes the positives are more challenging because we can always remember the negative things, but we think about the good things. We have to dig. So admire. They don't necessarily know what they want because they've been told what to want. They're fearless. Yes, I love that. They're fearless. They're always ready to try something new. Yeah. I admire the fearlessness. Yes. They're not shy to ask questions for sure. Yes. They'll call me right up, even though I'm like 4 levels above them, outside the box thinking. Yes. Yeah. I hear a lot from our Gen Zs. I'm an aquatics coordinator, so I've got 2 positions below me, and then a couple of full-time head guards, and then the lifeguards. And so many times they'll knock on my door and say, "Can I talk to you?" So they are definitely fearless. They're inclusive. Yeah, they've grown up with diversity. It's sometimes it's to a fault where, especially like this is National Women's History Month, like they don't know all the battles that were fought before them for them to have the rights they have today, but because they've grown up with it. Great, thank you. And so lastly, if you think about your workplace as one big happy family, where families have multiple generations, that's what families are, right? The defining family is multiple generations. And so if you think about those family dynamics that happen, and just what makes a successful or positive family experience, is just that level of understanding and where they're coming from and using our differences to our advantages. So I like this little comic here. I'll have someone from my generation get in touch with someone from your generation, and moving forward in the workplace. And lastly, this is just a wrap up here. And before I ask this last question here, I just wanted to speak to the generational patterns that happen in the workplace as well. That, today this presentation talks about the 5 different generations and kind of the stigma and stereotypes that go with it. But also it's, there's such a thing called generational patterns. And no matter where you are, in time, I could do this presentation, 30 years from now, and you would still see the same kind of incidents occurring where the older generation is frustrated with the younger generation. And these same things occur, right? Because it's just differences. That's just what happens. There's always going to be patterns. The same things happen. And you can kind of start to see that in yourself, when you're younger and you're like, the older generation just doesn't get it, like, I just want to be treated as an adult. And then fast forward 20 years later, and you are an adult and you are the older generation, you look back and you're like, those darn kids. And so it's always the same kind of concepts that occur. But if we can start to step back and appreciate those differences and have some self-awareness and where we're at now and where you were at in that point in aquatics, and when you were a teenager, it's not necessarily, we say, like, the generation that you grew up in is not, you can't teach to that generation because that doesn't exist anymore. You got to teach to this generation that's right in front of you to be successful. Great. And so my last slide here, that's my email in my work cell. So feel free to reach out if you have any more questions. Happy to hear from you and happy to help. And that concludes my presentation on working with different generations in aquatics. Thank you, everybody, for coming to the presentation today. Ooh, interesting. I'm a millennial who manages boomers. Millennials and Gen Zs. Yes. Yeah, the boomers don't always understand. Like, I text everything. So I know and it's important to kind of say that up front, I think, as well. When I first came to the workplace, I was like, listen, my name's Katie. I need to be able to exercise. I like texting. I'm an extrovert. I'm a millennial. This is the best way that I work well. And this is what's successful to manage me. And my supervisor and I have a really great, really working relationship because I've been very open and honest. And they recognize that, like, they're going to get a text from me. Maybe I'm also a night worker. Like, I'm not a morning person. I'm a night owl. So they might get a text from me at 10 o'clock at night, and that's completely normal for me. And it's not going to be a phone call or an email sometimes. And I've definitely had issues even within my own generation. We have 4 coordinators who run the building. And last week, he was like, why would you text me at 10 o'clock at night kind of thing? I'm like, well, that's like par for the course for me. He was like, always send it in an email. I'm like, okay. So note to self, next time he needs an email, I'm a texter. Good to know.
I live and die by pre-scheduling emails now that it's available in Google. So I am like you, Katie. I am working at 10 o'clock at night. I'm in my groove. I may as well work till midnight, 1 a.m., and then have a longer rest tomorrow. But it really stresses people out. And I've actually had some judgment sometimes when people see an email timestamped late at night. So now that there's the option in Google, like Google Workplace or G Suite, to pre-schedule everything for 8 a.m. the next morning, I am flooding people at 8 a.m. the next morning. And it makes sure it's at the top of their inbox. I don't get judgment or stigma from emailing late at night. It's sent when it's in my brain because I'm like you. It's like, oh, I just thought about it. Let me just go do it now, dispatch it. Texting, that's a little bit harder. But I've also found sometimes people will then open those emails at 10 p.m. at night and forget them the next morning because they don't have a practice. Like, I always leave mine unopened as a reminder, but so many strategies from your session today, I think. Let us know in the chat box, like, give Katie a kudos, what you liked, high five, loved, or what is one small thing you're going to implement? Because I really have to give you kudos, Katie, for consolidating so much information into really digestible chunks. That is a big thing with these generational pieces, is how much detail do we need? How much detail do we want? And I think you've really broken it down in a way that's going to be valuable for people who are on this session.
Thank you.
I wanted to talk about a couple comments that I have, and then we're going to go to some of the comments on the Facebook post I put in the chat box. So if anybody wants to add to that, or we've still got some lurkers, not everybody's keen to share in the chat box, and that's fine. But we're going to do a little kind of Q&A. So if you do have a specific question, you can pop that in the chat box and we'll address it. Anything that's come to mind, anything that you want additional information, clarification. But I do want to start, Katie. What does the research say, or what have you found when you were preparing this session about, like, the impact of nature or nurture? Because people obviously grow up in different households, different family units, different economic circumstances. And you talked a little bit about, like, blending or bridging kind of generations. But what did you see about, like, are there ever people who are not their generation at all because of their nurture?
Sure. Yes, I think that was everywhere, that these are definitely generalizations, and that was one of the 2 approaches that, like, people are raised by what happens in their, or defined by what happens in their life incidents, but also not everybody is like that. And if you think of, like, pre-wiring influenced by what happens, versus our experience, process versus product as well. But yeah, there was a lot of contradicting information out there, and I was lucky that I accessed the GW's scholarly library, because I found there was a lot of research out there that was just general Googling, and then I was like, I need to go back to like what has been actually empirical research. But yeah, definitely. The human development has a difference, and it's all, versus where you are growing up in the world too, has a huge difference, and access to resources. And I mean, you could expand that to culture, race, religion, and so forth. So you're right, have to put like parameters on it.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that as you were talking as well. Like you said, the unconscious bias of where I grew up. So I grew up in Ottawa, Canada. I grew up white. I grew up middle class. I went, all of these experiences are leveled onto. Also, I think like for myself, I can speak to the fact that my parents were older. They were some of the oldest parents of my friends. They were in their early 40s. My mom had had her career. She was a lawyer in the early 60s. That was very difficult for her. She had a child late in life. That informed everything, right? So my experience as a millennial might be quite different from someone who was born later to younger parents, and that really forms a lens that I have to step back from and thinking, well, not all millennials are like me. They might grow up in Texas or Argentina or, poor or wealthy. It's so like you could go down a whole rabbit trail with each of these pieces that you've shown to us today.
Yeah, and it was interesting. We had an in-service training at one of our sister pools at Dallas South on Friday, and there we just started Hydro Apps, and which is all online. We have no more paper; everything's on an iPad. And I was talking to their head guard at a different pool, and I said, "What do you think of Hydro Apps?" And she said, "I hate it. I don't like it. I like writing things down."
Yep.
And she's 22, and she said she's not really into technology. She didn't really grow up with it. She didn't have a lot of money growing up. She never really had access to technology, and she prefers. So I just thought that was an eye-opening experience as well. That she was not a fan of technology, and she is a Gen Z. So she said, I don't define myself with Gen Z. So not everybody, I guess, falls into those categories.
Well, and that's so interesting because that leads to one point I wanted to definitely discuss with you is I think every facility is different. And so I, for example, as a millennial, I might want to use millennial strategies. But if most of my staff are Gen Z or baby boomer, then I honestly have to let go of my lens and I need to manage up or manage down to what's going to actually work. And I think that's a big piece missing is we all have preferences, but if it's not getting uptake, what does it matter?
Right. And I know someone mentioned the group me not working, and I find like we have 72 lifeguards and then we have like 12 swim instructors, and the swim instructors are definitely older. They're more adults. I think more Gen X's and baby boomers, and they do not use the group me. So like and they've even said like we want emails. So I know when I research, when I want to communicate with my swim instructors, it needs to be more email, and then versus the lifeguards want like the memes and things like that. So
Well, and I think for any aquatic professional, you can do kind of an A/B test. So in marketing, in online social media, we talk about A/B. So you release something that is an A type, the way it's designed, and you also simultaneously release a B type, and you see what works better. And as a marketing person, you have to go with what your audience wants. And you may love the A and you may hate the B, but if you get more uptake on the B, that's what you go with. So moving forward, thinking about maybe you do memes, maybe you do email newsletters, maybe you do group texts until you have quantifiable data for your pool, your staff, your region, your accountability. You kind of have to mix it up. And I think a lot of people are stuck in a rut of what they like doing and saying, well, why doesn't it work? They don't read to the bottom of my email. Well, honestly, it just might be you have to change if you're part of the problem.
mm-hmm. Right.
I was also thinking, I loved what you said, Katie, about events that have shaped us. So, for example, for many people on this chat, 9/11, 2008 economic crisis, now COVID,
Mm-hmm.
and how that actually in aquatics, that's changing how um, what are the ways you think that that's changing, like COVID is changing what we're doing for you in Virginia and Loudoun County, Katie?
Well, it's a tricky question because in for where we are in Loudoun County, we actually COVID was a silver lining for our pool anyways in our three pools because we never really stopped. Like we stopped for the 6 weeks that, when COVID first came in, and then we regrouped, came up with all these new processes, one-way directionals, reservation times, mask and protocol, cleaning the decks and sanitizing twice a day. You name it, we had it. And then we opened in June, but we did it safely. And we started with just like 1 hour reservations, really short, we only opened not our full hours. And then, so we ended up actually getting far more swim meets. We started swim lessons in July, and we found that more and more people were coming to us because Maryland was totally shut down. So we are hosting twice, 3 times as many swim meets now, more than ever. We have little stickers in our grandstands that are like 10 feet apart. And so, I mean, it's hard for me to wrap my head around that for where we are, because we really haven't stopped. Like it's been feels very normal, but with the right safety precautions in place. And we've just, yeah.
Kudos to you, because I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I do understand as a pool professional, it's hard to look at other pools that are struggling with whether budget or staffing or, anything, and feel like, oh my gosh, why do we have more opportunities? Why do we have more revenue? Why are we able to do something different? But I think as much as we strive for equity and equality in aquatics, there does need to be market differentiators. There's always going to be pools that do things one way, and there should be pools that do things different ways so that consumers can pick different facilities. And I think that's missing from a lot of aquatic professionals, is recognizing that we don't have to be all the same, and we aren't all the same, right? Whether they're right or wrong, we're a little bit different.
Right. But also opening the door to online, like, in services. And now all of a sudden Loudoun County has a subscription to GoToMeeting, and we can just, like, I think our meetings of twofold, all of a sudden use the meeting for everything, because you're so much more available now. I'm like, oh, can't meet in person, we'll do a GoToMeeting, or we'll do a Zoom chat or a Skype meeting or whatever that is. But yeah, it definitely changes the way that we train, and it's allowed us to think differently working in a government entity where things were always, this is the way we do things, and this is the way, aquatics is always run in the past. The lid was blown open with COVID. And so we thought about different ways to run our swim lessons, different ways. How can we still have swim meets, swim lessons, lifeguard classes? We bought mannequins, and the new mannequin that comes from Europe, I forget her name, but she goes,
Ruth Lee.
Yes,
yeah,
thank you.
Ruth Lee.
We got 2 Ruth Lees for every pool, and like, whatever it took, like, we were lucky that we had the support financially as well. But I felt like we were still able to continue our path, but in a different way that we never would have done before. So I think there was a lot of positives that came out of COVID, in the sense that we had to change the way we did our organizational processes. But
well, and I think there's a lot of learning, and from that, sorry, I'm getting a pop-up that I don't recognize. There's a lot of learning from that, but I think it's also understanding. I'm looking at Andres's comment in the chat that we probably have left a lot of people behind in that process, but that doesn't mean we have to stay on this track forever. This might be the track for, the third wave of COVID or the third shutdown or whatever's happening in your region, but that doesn't mean that, we have to go all in from one change to the other, right? At the end of the day, maybe 12 months from now, we can mediate between what works and what's best for our clients. And I love also, Katie, you mentioned during the chat about with some of our older generations, they were at the very top of their career, maybe when COVID happened or when they retired, or maybe they had to leave their job. And there's a lot of grief that goes into that change and that identity shift that I think our lifeguards see at the deck level, when a customer comes in and they're used to being the CEO or the president, and now they're just a lane swimmer. And when their lane isn't available, that's a crisis for them, because they're used to, instantaneous people listening to them.
Yes. And that's where, some of those customer service techniques and tips that I found were really, and it's true. I mean, we definitely, not to say that you treat people differently, there's certain level of respect for everybody, but just a little bit more, reserved, and, Mr. and Mrs. like, yes, Mr. blah, blah, blah. Like, your lane is ready for you, kind of thing. When it comes to that generation. And I was thinking too about another, for COVID and in aquatics, we also increased our recruiting, just because schools were not in person, and our Gen Zs and millennials thrive off of that socialness, right? They just want to be be with their friends, and they weren't really enjoying the online schooling, and so they just, like, their friends were asking their friends and friends and friends, and we were filling our lifeguard classes because they just wanted to work together. So
Mhm.
we saw a huge rise in recruiting for lifeguards than ever before, because they wanted to work together, and be in that physical environment where, the social part. And that was the only time when they could see their friends and have some sort of a social life, was working as a lifeguard at Claude Moore, just in our own little personal bubble, at least. But
Well, and to that point, I think a lot of things, like people might pick up new habits or new friends or new strategies and behaviors, and they may not last forever. They may only last, for the current 12 months. But focusing, like you said, on the individual, it's not just the generation. The stereotype is helpful, but it can't be a box, because each
mhm.
individual, for 6 months, especially if you're younger, 6 months is a long time in your formative development. Like things will change and then maybe they change back or they kind of mediate in between.
Right, right.
I want to get to a couple comments we had on Facebook. If you guys have any questions, please do pop those in the chat box. We're going to start wrapping up soon. So there was some excellent comments on the Facebook post for the prize towel. So people saying that they love intergenerational staff teams, lots of great opportunities to share knowledge. And I think that's a huge silver lining. Have you got any programs like that currently, or what are you hoping to develop with the little and the big and the little?
Well, honestly, I just heard that technique and tip from AOAP 2 weeks ago, but I was going to start it this Thursday. Actually, I've got one of the division managers coming, and then for the first part of our head guard leadership training, and then the second part, we were going to match up with the big and little. Um, you know what? I was just going to breach it to our leaders and our head guards and see what they thought of that, and move from there. But it was really just, I think it's a great concept. And even these aren't new ideas, in the sense that, like, you would have going to any organization, you might have somebody who's your trainer or someone you can lean on. It's just another way to market it, I guess, and make it sound neat for the younger kids.
Well, and I
A
love that
mentor.
too, what you said about TikTok and Snapchat. I mean, we sometimes in management, we think about only delegating the stuff we don't want to do, when the reality is we should often be delegating the things we don't know how to do to those people that have that expertise, right? So maybe in that mentorship, that matching program, you're finding maybe an extrovert with another extrovert or an introvert with an extrovert, right? Like really building capacity in your organization that you don't have perhaps at a coordinator or manager level, by matching people up and kind of tasking them with helping each other grow. And I think there's so much potential. Anybody who's done mentorship programs, put anything in the chat box that you found really beneficial, because I don't think it has to
Mhm.
be formal, but it's just kind of, let's meet virtually perhaps and kind of move along with it.
Yeah, I mean, and I mean, my supervisor, this was pre-pandemic, but he asked that, hey, do you want to go out to lunch once a month or something like that? And we went to the Noodles and Company, and we just had like a little lunch, and we did that once a month for a couple months in a row, and that was huge. I mean, to be able to just out of work, and doesn't have to be your supervisor, it can be your big and little lunch, or um, some sort of a mentor. You give them a project. Like, for instance, we wanted our kids to swim more. So one of our Gen Z, I think she's like only 16. And I said, hey, we've got this bulletin board. Any ideas? And she had this idea to create the state of Virginia and put little Velcro things. And she put major markers in Virginia all over it. And then for each like couple miles you swim, you get to move your marker down. So you could say that, like, oh, I swam from Washington, D.C. all the way to Virginia Beach, and move your marker down. And she's like, I need this, and this. I need cardboard and, Velcro stickers. And I provided her the supplies. And on her downtimes, she did this beautiful bulletin board, and she loved it. So it's definitely, she was creative. It's not something I would have thought of. So maybe I would like give a big and little a project like that to work on. And in the meantime, they could just have somebody to go back and forth with.
Yeah, I think there's so much you could do. We're seeing some comments in the chat box, like experienced veteran staff with younger staff, junior staff, and you could do it within an organization. You could do it within multiple locations of an organization. You could do it virtual. You could do it physical. I mean, the sky's the limit. And if you need ideas, I know I'm involved with Big Brothers Big Sisters organization, and we have lots of tools and strategies to help us kind of work with people that maybe we don't think we're matched, but they find things that bring us together. I also want to remind people we do have a social tomorrow night, Tuesday night. It's free on Zoom if you're interested in meeting other aquatic professionals like you have in this webinar setting. So if you want to connect and get a mentor, maybe in Virginia, maybe in Washington, maybe in Iowa, you want just someone to bounce ideas off. I know I do that a lot in my day-to-day work, but why not find someone that you can have a Zoom call with every couple months and just check in and get a fresh perspective, because we're often beating our heads against the same wall without even realizing it. Last couple calls for questions. I'm just looking at the feedback we had. One of the challenges people reported on Facebook was balancing everyone's expectations for each other. Do you have any thoughts on that, Katie?
Yes, because this was the phone call I received. Let's see, I presented at 1 at noon. I got a phone call from my supervisor, and she said, "I am done. This girl, like I have set the expectations for her, and she just doesn't seem to be getting it." And yeah, I think it's about defining and using the approaches that work with that certain generation the best. I mean, I said, well, have you written it down? Did you send in a text? Like, have you had that formal meeting one-on-one and said, this is important, I really need to set the expectation here? She said, no, well, I kind of mentioned it to her. I'm like, well, you gotta, so oftentimes, on a Saturday or Sunday, if I'm there, I'll have the knock, can I talk to you? And they'll come in and come on in. Obviously those challenges where you're helping be strategic, where this person's setting expectations that's not necessarily the same as somebody else we think we are, but it's not where they're at, or they need coaching or mentoring to get to that, to bridge the gap. But yes, I think that goes for all generations as well.
Well, and not to belabor the point, because we could be here all day, and we're going to start to wrap up, really, is personality is a huge piece. This is just the point of the session today was very much to get you thinking about those different generations. I love what you said, Katie, about the millennial as a bad word, because it is, a lot of people do use it that way. And it's really just, it's supposed to give you an idea of what the person is, not the reality of what the person is. And I know myself as an instructor trainer, I often I put it in the chat box, 16 personalities. And I ask my candidates or my staff to fill it out and send the results to me. And it's anonymous. I don't share them unless they all agree to share them. But then I kind of can put my brackets in the room of who's this, who's that. And I still want to get to know them as a person. But sometimes in a 40-hour course, there's only so much I can get to know. So it can be a helpful strategy to level, age, generation, work preference, learning preference, personality, and kind of get to the cause or the root before anything else. Yeah. Just looking at final comments. Lots of great comments in Facebook. Lots of great comments from everyone in the chat. I want to say big thank you to Katie Cleasby from Loudoun County, Virginia, for being here today. Any final thoughts, Katie, or anything you want to add?
No, this was really fun. I mean, it was kind of a last minute thing, but I really enjoyed, the research and the opportunity to speak, and I think I'm going to continue to learn too. And I know we're all learning. So thank you for the opportunity today. I appreciate it.
And I so appreciate that you used academic research, because I do agree this could be an area where you get into not you, but someone could get into territory of just Wikipedia, Google, fake news, that we really do need some actual, whether you're buying a book or listening to a researcher's podcast, that you're grounding what you're applying in the workplace from authoritative sources and not just hearsay from people who don't have the credentials to really be talking about what they're talking about.
I thought about, because I know in a scholarly presentation you put like the APA at the end of everything.
We're good.
in my PhD stuff the last 2 years, So I started to do that, and then I thought, oh, people are just not going to want to see all that. So I ended up deleting it. But
No, but you've provided your contact information. So if somebody had a specific question, they can reach out to you. Katie Cleasby, very easy to find on Google or LinkedIn for Loudoun County, or have a look at the show notes, download the PowerPoints and get her contact info to follow up if you have a specific question. I'm going to start to wrap up with some of the sessions coming up in the next couple days. So you're welcome to stay, Katie, or you can turn your camera off. Just don't close the meeting when you leave. I'll be on here for a few minutes taking any questions you guys might have about the upcoming sessions. Thanks so much. So today is Monday, March 8th. We've just finished up this session. Coming up on Wednesday this week, we have Dr. Audrey Giles from the University of Ottawa. She has been doing research in aquatics for all of her professional career, looking specifically at white bias, as well as the way that swimming programs are developed, water safety campaigns are developed, and the limitations of those on Indigenous communities, First Nations communities in Canada. I heard Dr. Giles at the Alberta Recreation and Parks Association conference when I first moved out to Alberta about 8 years ago, and she is excellent. She is really, really, the stuff that she shares, she's going to be sharing her most current research, and you can find tons of her articles cited on the internet. She's going to be sharing kind of her current research, and it's just mind-blowing. Honestly, it changes perspective completely. Whether you work with Indigenous communities, Métis communities, First Nations communities, Aboriginal communities, or not, this is a valuable perspective that aquatic professionals need on the limitations and the way our programs have been designed. So if you haven't registered for that session, I encourage you to do so. Obviously, we do record all sessions, but there is something special about when we have the live audience and we can really grab your feedback and your comments. Coming up on Friday, we are doing person-centered, person-directed approach to recreation programming. So what that means is looking at the individual and what abilities that they have. Originally, this was framed as a conversation about seniors, like advanced seniors recreation programming, but I've been learning while working with our presenters, Shauna and Alicia. They work at a community called Eden Care in Regina, Saskatchewan, and they work with senior citizens in their 70s, 80s, 90s, programming recreation that is suitable to their medical needs and their cognitive needs. They're going to be taking a step back from just that seniors framework and really sharing with us how we can think about the individual at the center of our programming. And we in aquatics are very guilty of, we kind of roll our eyes at the seniors who are doing the aqua fitness and they come in to swim at 5 a.m. and they're a very certain type of clientele. But I want to encourage you to think about, you're probably only seeing a very specific demographic of seniors that are able-bodied, and how can we better reach our populations who are either requiring rehabilitation, therapy, they have other needs that we are not necessarily serving in our aquatic facilities, and we should be with the warm water and the way that water can help reconstruct and assist these individuals. So really excited. They come from outside of aquatics. They work as therapists, recreation therapists, directly with elderly clientele. So they've said, you know, we're not really aquatics people, but that's the best thing, is they're bringing a fresh perspective to a part of our industry that we are really not accommodating enough, in my opinion. And also, seniors programming, seniors recreation is a huge growing sector of recreation in general. So when you're starting to look at those long-term care facilities, those living residences, like, it's a growing sector of the recreation industry. And as such, we need to be better informed in aquatics, how they can connect with what we should be doing in our work areas and in our facilities. So those are the sessions coming up this week. If you are looking ahead, we do have lots of sessions next week up until the end of March. We have sessions on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 11 a.m. Mountain or 1 p.m. Eastern. Towards the end of the month, we do have 2 sessions that are at irregular times, one with a presenter from Australia and one with a presenter from BC. So if you pre-register with Click Meeting, you can add it to your calendar, Google, iCal, and then you will receive the reminder notifications. And if you're not able to attend, you're always going to get the links to the show notes where the recording will be posted, hopefully in 1 to 2 weeks. I want to say thank you so much to everyone who joined us today. We had a great session with over 55 people attending live. Katie Cleasby did a great session about working with different generations. I know I gained a lot from this session, and I hope you did too. She's generously provided resources on the show notes page, which is still pinned in the chat box. You can reach out to her. She's very accessible. She's doing amazing research, and I look forward to hearing what she does in the future with her dissertation. And once that's publicly accessible, how she goes out and shares that in the world with either workshops or facility sessions, because frankly, there's not a lot of research being done at the doctoral level in aquatics. So thanks so much, everyone. I hope you have a great week. It is beautiful, sunny day here in Alberta. I hope it's nice where you are, and stay safe. Do the best that you can do given the circumstances we're in as we come up on our 1-year COVID-versary for many of us. If there's anything I can do to help you, please don't hesitate to reach out. You can find us on social media. Many of you know that, but in case you don't have the links, Lakeview Aquatic Consultants is my company. We are on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, as well as our monthly newsletter. You can join any of those if you'd like to get more information from me. We do not automatically add you to any of our databases. That would not be privacy compliant. So if you would like to hear from me more often, that is the best way to connect. Have a great rest of your week.